Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video for the 10th anniversary of another game in the Assassin's Creed series, I'm going to be talking about my thoughts on Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, which I guess I'm making this video. I mean, obviously I just did my retrospective of Assassin's Creed 3 as I typically would, but mainly after my latest replay of it, I did decide to also play the PS4 remaster of Liberation as well. So again, I guess we'll talk about it here. And really, Liberation is just such a meh game to me. Obviously, I am someone that was a massive Assassin's Creed fan back in the day, but Liberation is a game that did kind of evade me for a decent amount of time. Obviously, I was extremely hyped for Assassin's Creed 3, but I didn't have a Vita, which this game was initially exclusive to, so while I did eventually watch like a playthrough of the game, and it was eventually ported to consoles in 2014, I didn't end up playing it for myself until a few years after that, and even then retained very little memory of the game itself, and it wasn't until the PS4 remaster came out that I ended up doing most of what the game had to offer. So again, it isn't a game that I have that extensive of a history with, and really it's a game that I just don't have that strong of opinions on, with it overall just being kind of a mediocre Assassin's Creed game, but one that is strong considering the fact that it was released on the Vita. But with that, I also want to talk a bit more in detail about my thoughts on the game. Now, obviously, this is an Assassin's Creed spin-off game that, again, was originally released for PS Vita, but despite that limitation, this game does play similarly to that of AC3, being built on the same engine, and while you can definitely tell some cut corners here and there, this certainly would have been a very impressive handheld game when it was originally released in 2012, truly feeling like a full-blown Assassin's Creed game that was fully portable here. Now, if only the quality of the writing was on par with the previous installments, but here Aveline has most of the same parkour and combat abilities to that of Connor in AC3, though there are some minor additions in that of weapons like a blowpipe and the whip, which really don't change the formula too much. This game does also have a chain kill system that allows you to kill multiple enemies at once, though realistically I rarely used it. This game does also allow you to ride in a canoe while in the bayou, which is interesting considering that was originally a gameplay mechanic that was intended to be in AC3, but was eventually cut, so interesting that it made the cut here. But really the biggest gameplay change is one that I am largely conflicted on, and that being the persona system, where Aveline has 3 different disguises she can swap between by going into a dressing chamber, and each of them have their pros and cons. The assassin outfit plays similarly to that of previous installments, though it is where Aveline will be the most easily detected. You then have the slave outfit that does restrict weapons to those that are only hidden, but does allow her to blend in with the other slaves, but I never found this outfit that useful outside of situations where the game forces you to use it. And the same thing goes, but even more so, with the lady outfit, which is where your movement is really restricted, but it is harder for you to be detected, and you can charm and bribe guards in this outfit. But really, I just spend most of my time in the assassin outfit, and really, I just feel like the system as a whole is just better conceptually than it is in execution, as I never felt too incentivized to change my outfits, and even when you do, you have to find a dressing chamber to do so, and that was just kind of an annoyance. But also, let's talk about the open world here, which is broken up into 3 different locations. The main city in the game is colonial New Orleans, which functions similarly to the cities of New York and Boston in AC3, which again, I still find the colonial setting to be mostly boring, and the city here is mostly just fine. It doesn't really stand out too much. You also get the bayou, which is this dreary, swampy area that functions similarly to that of the frontier, but more annoying in the sense that there's more water to navigate, which is just a pain. You do also have Chichen Itza, which is more so a set piece for the main campaign than it is that explorable of an area. So I mean, really, the open worlds in this game never truly invested me, and the same goes with the side content as well, which comprises of collectibles and some monotonous activities that really just didn't add that much to the experience to me. But then let's start talking about the narrative, which does follow Aveline de Grandpré, the first ever female protagonist for the series, which makes it disappointing that Aveline isn't a more interesting character. I mean, I feel like she is on paper, where she has this interesting background of being a French African assassin at the time of colonial America, and this game does explore her background a bit, but I just never found her to be that compelling of a character, especially in comparison to the protagonists of the main entries up until this point, where she just comes off as kind of bland to me. The modern day in this game is also extremely minimal, with us not following the story of Desmond Miles, instead playing through the memories of an unknown individual at the time that we do get to know a bit more about in AC4, with them being labeled as Subject 1, with these being memories observed by Abstergo and bizarrely turned into a game within the universe, and this game that we are playing also exists within canon, which is just really weird and meta, really giving you an idea of the trajectory that AC games are going in moving forward, where this context is utilized in future installments and becomes a prominent feature in it with a lack of a modern day protagonist. And from this point forward, really up until Origins, all of the games end up being just memories that Abstergo had collected through their Animus project. But it does also lead to another unique aspect of this game, where you find out that some of the memories shown are fabricated by Abstergo, to where your game gets hacked by Eurydice, this hacking group that wants to reveal the true history of the Assassins and Templars and show you the true reality. And all this is so bizarre to me that Abstergo is at the point where they're making games to use as propaganda to show the Templars in a good light, despite the fact that the public doesn't know that they are Templars, which makes you really question, like, why are they doing this? Like, it really feels like the Templars are just like stroking their own ego, and really feels like a moment where the game has become so meta that's kind of jumped the shark in my eyes, exploring this side of the story that really was never intended to be explored. And again, makes this and a lot of future installments in the series just feel very superfluous to what the series was initially meant to be. But now let's run through my thoughts on the main campaign, where Sequence 1 does start with a flashback of young Aveline as she follows a chicken for some reason, but this does lead to her losing her mom, which turns out to be a dream sequence that shows you a bit of her psyche. But obviously you get a series of tutorials, including one that you have to infiltrate a slave camp undetected, which I should mention that a really annoying aspect of this game are the number of missions that require you to do them undetected, and really just feels like an unnecessary objective at points that they're just adding to the game to make it longer. But this sequence does really show you a bit of Aveline's personality, with her using her privilege of being free and coming from a rich family in order to rescue those that are enslaved. Also here we also get introduced to some major characters like Gerald, who ends up being Aveline's closest associate, who is also clearly in love with her, which feels like a generic trope of any story that has a strong female protagonist. Also we get to meet Aveline's stepmother Madeline, who may play a factor moving forward in the story, but through some annoying investigation and tailing missions, we do uncover a deal between the governor of New Orleans and the Templar Raphael Joaquin de Ferrer, leading to us breaking into the governor's mansion and getting our first assassination mission, which does utilize the disguise system pretty well here, as you get to choose between the slave or lady outfits to use to infiltrate the mansion. And through which one you choose, you get two very different paths of how the mission plays out, which does highlight the upsides of that system. Though again, I just wish it was utilized a bit more. Sequence 2 does have us leaving the city for our first trip to the bayou, on the hunt for another of de Ferrer's associates, Baptiste, who is claiming to be Francois Macandal, the former assassin mentor, in order to gain followers. And along the way, we get to meet Aveline's mentor, Agate, who is fine as a character here, though I did find his overall arc to be pretty bizarre by the end of it. But here we also get introduced to poison darts and get more sections where you have to get through undetected, which is still annoying. You have to fight an alligator and ride in the canoe, which is all just typical bayou stuff. We also meet Elise, who ends up being an extremely forgettable character, but ends up being our main associate in the bayou. But eventually we catch up with Baptiste, where you get one of the more difficult combat encounters in the game of having to fight off him and his bodyguards, and Baptiste does end up being one of the more notable villains from this game, largely because he is a former assassin that flipped over to the Templar side, and through that is referenced in future installments because of that. But this is also where we get our first instance of seeing the whole truth, which is really just seeing more scenes of the Templars doing like underhanded things. And while this is an interesting concept, I don't feel like it adds that much to the overall experience here, outside of just being something that's unique to this game. But then we get to Sequence 3, which does start off with us returning to New Orleans, where we get our headquarters, and introduces us to a trading system that I never bothered dealing with. But outside of that, it really just functions similarly to how other hideouts worked in previous games. But afterwards, we do end up doing an investigation into some vanishing slaves, where we do get numerous sections of having to go undetected while also killing all the guards in the area, which is just really annoying to play. One in particular where you have to kill the guards on this small boat without being detected, which is one of the dumbest missions I've ever played, with it being a pain considering how easily detected you are with all the enemies being in close range to each other, which makes this a really dreadful mission there. But this is all to get to assassinating the next governor of New Orleans, a Templar named Antonio de Uola, which has us ambushing his carriage, which, what do you know, is an annoying mission. But here we end up sparing him after he reveals that the Templars have been secretly sending slaves to a worksite of theirs in Chichen Itza, but by sparing him, we do end up upsetting Agate due to her not following his orders, starting the downward trajectory of their relationship. Leading us to sequence 4, where against his wishes, we end up disguising ourselves as a slave and get sent to Chichen Itza ourselves, where we do get a lot of investigation sections that lead us finding a map to an artifact in a nearby cenote. And you end up having to explore the caves, leading to you finding a first Civ site where you end up obtaining the Prophecy Disc, which ends up being the main piece of Eden for this game. But once we do, Defraire shows up and we finally have to take him down in another relatively difficult fight with him and his guards, and have a rather annoying parkour section immediately afterwards as we have to escape the caves. That, again, rarely functions properly in my experience, though afterwards we do end up encountering Aveline's mother, Jeanne, who conveniently is also here in Chichen Itza, who had believed that Aveline was there to kill her and ends up warning her of Agate. And really, I just find all this to be a bizarre scene that just seemed to be over dramatic and served very little purpose to the story outside of just revealing what happened to Aveline's mom. But then we get to sequence 5, and I should mention that from this point forward, these sequences really go by super quick. Despite sequence 5 only being halfway through the main campaign, it's probably a good 2/3 of the way through the main story, with those initial 4 sequences taking up a bulk of the game, which through that makes the back portion of this game come off as extremely rushed to me. But in this sequence, we do have Aveline returning to New Orleans after 2 years, and thankfully with that, we get more tailing missions and missions where you can't be detected while killing people, because obviously, developers thought that was fun, but it does lead to us learning about Vasquez, who Aveline believes to be the Templar leader, who has been mentioned throughout the game under the alias of the Company Man. And with that, Vasquez becomes her target moving forward. But then we get to sequence 6, where kind of out of nowhere, we just return to Chichen Itza to retrieve the final piece of the Prophecy Disc, and along the way, Aveline repairs her relationship with her mother, though it really leads to nothing as Jean just stays behind anyway. But gameplay-wise, we do have to explore the caves, which really highlights the parkour system, but also shows you how frustrating it can be at points. You also have this canoe section that's pretty difficult, you having to avoid the obstacles, and also you get underwater swimming, which is kind of weird. This is the first game to have that style of gameplay, but it plays as you would expect it to. And really, the sequence just ends up being a bit of a random detour from the main story that just feels like we're doing the same thing as sequence 4, while also not adding that much to the core narrative. But then we jump back into sequence 7, where we return to New Orleans again to find Aveline's father in his deathbed, and we get another kind of weird detour, the one that obviously ends up playing into the narrative a bit more later on, of Madeline asking us to help her escort a slave named George out of the city, and that leads to some more boring missions, though obviously leads to a fun reveal later on. But eventually we do end up tracking down Vasquez at a party, during which you have to charm him to eventually kill him in secret, where he does end up revealing that he is not the Company Man, which who would have guessed that? But this again makes the story take another detour in Gerald, revealing that Officer Davidson, a Templar working for the Company Man, has been located in a New York frontier, leading us to sequence 8, which has us getting this weird crossover sequence between Aveline and Connor that really just feels like it's here to connect the two games, but we do end up working alongside him to infiltrate a fort. And interestingly, there is a special mission here that can only be accessed through connecting AC3 and Liberation. Initially, though, obviously in the remaster you can get it through Uplay, but it does allow you to play as Connor during this section, though realistically it doesn't add that much to experience. But through taking down Davidson, we get the reveal that he is actually George, the slave that we helped escape, and it turns out that the Company Man is actually Aveline's stepmother, Madeline, which was kind of obvious, as what other character would it be at this point? Especially considering the Company Man's identity was being kept for so long. It had to be a character that we already knew, so again, found this revelation to be kind of standard, but I did like how they brought George back into the story to make everything click a bit better here. Oh, then we jump into the final sequence, sequence 9, which feels extremely rushed, where really a lot of it is just abruptly cutting from scene to scene, but it does start with Aveline confronting Madeline, who reveals that she's been preparing Aveline to join the Templar Order throughout her entire life, looking at her as a daughter figure, and this abruptly transitions to Aveline telling Agate about this news, and he responds by attacking her for some reason. Which again is just a really weird trajectory for Agate here, where he loses all trust in Aveline, thinking that she has turned to the Templars and ends up diving to his death which was just a jarring way to end his storyline. I just find it weird like how crazy Agate goes pretty abruptly over the course of this story. But something I did like about this section is how the gameplay was kind of reminiscent to the Al-Mualim fight in AC1, where we do get these hallucinations, where we end up having these mini boss battles against each of the previous targets, which I've always liked sections like this towards the end of really just any game in general, though obviously it's a generic trope at this point. But afterwards, we do end up seeing Aveline return to Madeline, where we do end up deciding to join the Templar Order, and that's the game. That's it. We get credits. Until it's revealed that this isn't the true ending, and we get another platforming section before Erudito shows us the true ending, where this was actually all a ruse, and we do get our final boss battle against Madeline, leading to Aveline finishing her off, with Adeline's acting here being really over the top and really just came off as laughable to me. But we do end the game with Aveline activating the prophecy disc, which displays a message from the time of the Human-Isu War, which states that Eve is the leader of the rebellion, which was an interesting revelation at the time that furthered the importance of Eve and obviously the descendant of Eve, as previously stated in Brotherhood, which should have been a very integral figure in the modern day, and this ends up being a cool setup. But like most of Assassin's Creed, it doesn't end up being executed properly. To where, while this storyline can be attributed to Charlotte de la Cruz, who is the one that killed Juno in the comics, or to Layla, who fills this role in terms of being the one to save the world from the next catastrophe, these storylines just never felt like a true satisfying follow-up to what was set up here, with all of that coming off as a very blatant retcon. Though obviously, again, at the time, I did find this to be a cool scene, with it giving us a glimpse of what could be to come in the Assassin's Creed series. But with that, that's the entire game of AC Liberation, a game that, again, I am, for the most part, just fine with. Like, it's fine. I hate a lot of the mission design. I think Aveline is a mostly bland character. I do think the story is bizarrely paced. But for a portable Assassin's Creed game, is probably the best one that we've gotten and maybe ever will get. Though even then, I think there's a debate with Bloodlines, but again, like at the end of the day, like this game is simply just not on the same level as any of the other main entries outside maybe Odyssey or Valhalla. Where, I mean, in comparison to those, like at least this feels like an Assassin's Creed game. Though obviously a mediocre one, and one that is a mostly unimportant experience, that the only reason I decided to make this video here is because I own it and I decided to play it immediately after AC3, so why not? But with that, those are my thoughts on AC Liberation. Obviously, stay tuned for more similar videos down the road. I have a few more retrospectives planned before the end of the year, so stay tuned for those. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.